My mom is giving her house to charity when she dies, even though she knows I'm struggling. Before you become judgmental, please wait until I get into the full details. This isn't a story about greed, it's not a story about entitlement, and it's not as simple as it sounds in the title. Before I explain how I got here, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you want more real stories like this one. Stories told from the inside, stories that don't give you an easy villain or a clean ending, stories that sit with you a little longer than you expect. Now let me tell you what actually happened. I stayed sitting there long after the call ended, not staring at the phone anymore, just holding it, like if I let go too fast, something else might fall with it. The room felt still, not calm, just stopped. I could hear my own breathing, slow and shallow, like my body was trying to stay quiet so it wouldn't disturb whatever had just settled inside me. My shoulders were tense without me realizing it, and when I finally noticed, I tried to relax them, but they didn't really move. I opened my bank app without thinking. I do that when I'm anxious. Same balance, same numbers I've memorized. Enough to survive, not enough to change anything. I closed it and stared up at the ceiling instead. The same small crack above the light fixture. I've counted it before. I could trace it from memory. I wondered how many times I'd looked up there thinking about what my life would look like in 5 years, or 10, or whether I was running out of time to want the things I still wanted. My throat felt tight, like I needed to swallow, but there was nothing there. No words, no reaction that made sense. I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking, I didn't feel dramatic. I felt placed on pause. There was this dull pressure in my chest, not pain, more like something had been set down gently but firmly, and now I was expected to carry it without asking what it was. I replayed her voice in my head, even, calm, certain. No hesitation, no softness at the end of the sentence, no opening where I could step in. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't leave space for a response. She just said it, the way people say things they've already made peace with. I remember thinking how strange it was that someone could talk about the end of their life so casually, while I was sitting there trying to figure out how to get through the next few years. I pressed my lips together and exhaled through my nose, slowly, like if I breathed the wrong way, something inside me might break its composure. I wasn't angry at her. That surprised me. I wasn't shocked either, not fully. It felt more like recognition, like hearing something out loud that had already been forming quietly in the background, even if I didn't want to admit it. I sat there and tried to name the feeling. Disappointment didn't fit. Sadness felt too clean. It felt closer to being left out of a conversation I didn't know was happening, like decisions were being made somewhere else, at a table I was never invited to sit at. I thought about all the ways I could have responded differently, all the things I didn't say, all the questions that stayed in my mouth because I didn't know which one would make me sound ungrateful or selfish or small. And then it hit me, quietly, without drama. She had already chosen. She had already arranged the future in her head, and I wasn't part of the picture she was planning for. I stared at the ceiling a little longer, letting that settle, and wondered when I'd learned to accept things this way, to nod internally, to tell myself it was fine before anyone else could say it. Because in that moment, it wasn't about a house, it wasn't even about money. It was the realization that she made a decision about the one thing that could change my life, and never once thought to ask how my life actually looked. For some grounding, my name is Lena. I'm 30 years old. I live on my own. I work full-time. I pay my rent, my utilities, my insurance, all the ordinary things that come with being an adult. I don't ask my mom for money, and I haven't for years. From the outside, I look functional. I show up, I manage, I get by. If you met me casually, you'd probably assume I was doing okay, not struggling in an obvious way, not falling apart, just another person moving through life, quietly handling things. And that's true, to a point. The part people don't see is how narrow the margin is, how little room there is for anything unexpected. I save when I can, but the savings never grow in a way that feels meaningful. It's more like maintenance than progress. One step forward, one bill later, I'm right back where I started. I rent a place I can't make my own. I hesitate before buying anything that isn't strictly necessary. I plan my life around affordability instead of desire. Every decision runs through the same filter. Can I handle this if nothing else goes wrong? Owning a home feels like something I'm constantly circling but never reaching. The idea of having a child, that feels even further away. Not because I don't want to be a parent, but because I don't know how to give a child stability when I'm still trying to secure my own. It's a quiet kind of stuck, the kind you can live with for years without anyone noticing. My mom, Margaret, is 68. She's in good health. She's independent, she lives alone in the house she owns outright. No mortgage, no looming financial stress tied to it. She manages her own affairs. She's capable and clear-headed. This isn't a story about caretaking. It isn't about me worrying that she won't be okay. She's okay. Our relationship has always existed in this careful middle ground. She's not cruel, she's not explosive, she doesn't belittle or control, but she's also not especially warm or emotionally open. We talk, but we don't really talk. We check in, but we don't go deep. There's an understanding that certain things stay unspoken. She's the kind of person who handles things internally, who decides quietly and informs others later. Feelings are acknowledged politely, then set aside in favor of what seems practical or appropriate. The house she lives in is the one thing of real value she has. Everything else is modest, sensible. There's no hidden wealth, no backup inheritance, just that house, the place we lived in growing up, the one stable thing in a childhood that didn't have much else. Growing up, money was always tight. We learned early how to live small. I learned not to ask for things, not because anyone told me not to, but because I could see the strain. I learned to measure my wants against what felt reasonable to expect. That habit stayed with me. So when I asked my mom if she'd talked to an advisor about writing a will, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't loaded, it was a practical adult question, something people eventually have to do. I wasn't asking for anything, I wasn't hinting, I wasn't making a claim. I didn't ask for the house, I didn't ask what would happen to it. I just asked a question, and somehow that simple question opened a door I didn't know was already closed. The conversation itself didn't feel heavy when it started. That's the strange part. We were talking on the phone, casually, about nothing important, just small updates, ordinary things. I mentioned work, she mentioned something she needed to get done around the house. It was one of those conversations that fills space without really touching anything. At some point, I asked her if she'd ever talked to an advisor about writing a will. Not because I was worried, not because I was thinking about inheritance, just because she's getting older and it felt like a responsible thing to ask. She laughed lightly first, the kind of laugh that brushes something off. "Oh, I haven't done that yet. I keep meaning to." Her tone was relaxed, almost casual, like we were talking about reorganizing a closet or getting around to a doctor's appointment. I remember nodding, even though she couldn't see me, and saying something like, "Yeah, it's probably a good idea at some point." There was a short pause after that, not awkward, just quiet. Then she said it. "I'm giving the house to charity when I die." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation, no checking in. The sentence landed cleanly, as if it had already been rehearsed. For a second, my brain didn't catch up. I waited for something else to follow it. A laugh, a clarification, and "I'm kidding," or "we'll see," or "I haven't fully decided yet." Nothing came. I remember blinking, standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, trying to figure out if I'd misunderstood her, if maybe she was sarcastic, if this was one of those comments people throw out casually without realizing how it sounds. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do. I wondered if she was testing me, if she wanted a reaction, if she expected me to argue. I didn't. I didn't ask why, I didn't say how I felt, I didn't point out anything about my life, or my situation, or my sister. I just said, very calmly, "Oh, okay, it's your decision." The words came out evenly, polite, neutral, the kind of response that closes a door instead of pushing on it. Inside, though, everything felt suspended, like time had slowed down just enough for me to notice the weight of what she'd said without knowing how to hold it. There was a tightness in my chest that I ignored, a flicker of something sharp that I pushed down immediately. I didn't want to sound emotional, I didn't want to sound entitled, I didn't want to sound like I was expecting anything. She didn't respond to my answer, she just moved on, talking about something else, as if the conversation hadn't shifted at all. And that's what stayed with me. Not the decision itself, but how settled she sounded when she said it. Like it wasn't a thought, like it wasn't up for discussion, like it had already been decided somewhere far away from me before I ever asked that question. After we hung up, I kept telling myself to move on. I cleaned the kitchen, I folded laundry that didn't really need folding, I scrolled through my phone without actually reading anything. I kept myself busy in that shallow, restless way that's meant to stop thoughts from forming full sentences. But they formed anyway. The first thing I told myself was that it wasn't my place to feel anything about it, that it was her house, her life, her choice. I repeated that like a rule I'd memorized, like if I said it enough times it would become true in my body, not just my head. I reminded myself that I wasn't owed anything, that inheritance isn't a guarantee, that adults don't plan their lives around what they might get someday. I compared myself to people who have it harder, people who grew up with less, people who don't have parents who are still around, people who never had the safety net of even imagining an inheritance at all. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself I should be grateful. I told myself this wasn't a real problem. And every time I thought about the house, I felt a flash of shame, like the thought itself was selfish, like it said something ugly about me. I didn't want to be the kind of person who counted someone else's possessions as part of their future, so I minimized everything. I told myself I wasn't struggling that badly. I told myself I could figure things out eventually. I told myself I didn't need help. I've gotten very good at telling myself that. But late that night, lying in bed, staring at the dark, all of those arguments started to feel thin, like they were stacked on top of something I wasn't allowing myself to name. I realized how carefully I'd avoided one specific question. Did she even think about me? Not in a dramatic way, not as a moral failure, just at all. Did she pause, even briefly, and wonder what that house might mean to her daughters? Did she consider how different it would feel to give everything away instead of keeping something within the family? Did it cross her mind that maybe, just maybe, her children's lives were still unfinished? And that's when I felt the real conflict, because this wasn't about money versus charity. It wasn't about fairness or greed or entitlement. It was about visibility. It was about realizing that my struggles existed in a place she didn't seem to look, that I could be functioning, polite, independent, and still completely invisible in the decisions that mattered most. I've spent my whole life making myself easy, not asking for much, not taking up space, not being a problem, and suddenly it felt like that strategy had worked a little too well. I wasn't angry that she wanted to help others. I wasn't angry that she had her own values. I was hurt that my life didn't register as part of the equation. And sitting there in the dark, with all those thoughts circling quietly, I finally admitted something to myself that I hadn't wanted to say out loud. I wasn't upset about losing something I thought I deserved. I was upset about never being considered in the first place. I think what made that realization hurt more was how familiar it felt. Because growing up, my life was shaped by learning how to stay out of the way. We didn't grow up with much money, not in a dramatic, obvious way. There were no eviction notices taped to the door, no public disasters, just constant carefulness. Bills paid late but paid, groceries stretched, clothes worn until they couldn't be worn anymore. What we didn't have was talked around, not talked about. I learned early how to read a room, how to tell when asking for something would add weight my mom didn't need. I don't remember being told not to ask, I just stopped. I could see the math on her face, the tiredness, the way her shoulders never really dropped. My mom did everything. She worked, she managed the house, she handled problems quietly and efficiently. She made things work. My dad was there, physically, but not really present. He drank, not always loudly, not always violently, but enough that his absence was felt even when he was in the room. He needed attention, reassurance, patience. He took up space without contributing much back. He was emotionally immature in a way that made the rest of us smaller. Conversations bent around his moods, plans adjusted to his unpredictability. When things went wrong, it was easier to work around him than to confront him. And my mom stayed. She smoothed things over. She made excuses. She carried the weight. She kept everything functioning. From the outside, it looked like resilience. Inside, it felt like survival. That house we lived in wasn't warm. It was efficient. It was a place where you learned how to adapt, not how to relax. Where you learned how to be low maintenance, helpful, understanding. Needs weren't forbidden, they were inconvenient. So I learned to have fewer of them. I learned that silence had value, that not asking made things easier, that being self-sufficient was a kind of currency. The less I needed, the less strain I caused. The less visible I became, the smoother things ran. I watched my mom choose stability over confrontation, order over emotional messiness. I watched her sacrifice parts of herself to keep things moving forward, and I absorbed the lesson without realizing it. Don't rock things, don't complicate, don't ask for more. So when my dad eventually left to be with someone else, it didn't feel shocking. It felt like the final step in a pattern that had already been set. My mom held everything together until she couldn't anymore. And now, years later, listening to her talk so calmly about giving away the one thing that could change my life, I felt that same familiar feeling settle in. That sense that she had chosen something else, something orderly, something that made sense to her. And it hit me, slowly, clearly. This wasn't the first time my mother chose something else over us. I didn't talk to my sister right away. Part of me already knew how that conversation would go, and I wasn't sure I had the energy to hear it confirmed. But eventually I did. I called Rachel a few days later, trying to sound casual, like I was just sharing information, not looking for validation. Rachel is 3 years older than me. We grew up in the same house, under the same roof, with the same parents, but we learned very different ways of dealing with it. Where I learned to stay quiet, Rachel learned to detach. Where I learned to adapt, she learned to distance herself. She's practical, blunt, not someone who lingers on feelings for long. She doesn't like unresolved conversations. She prefers clean lines, even when things are messy. I told her what Mom had said. I tried to keep my voice even. I didn't frame it as a complaint. I just laid it out the way it happened. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a shocked pause, more like a processing one. Then she said, "I mean, it's her house." Just that. No follow-up, no questions, no acknowledgement of how it landed. I waited, thinking maybe she'd add something else. She didn't. "She can do whatever she wants with it," Rachel continued. "It's not really about us." I said I knew that I wasn't arguing that point, that I understood it was Mom's decision. "Well," she said, "then I don't really see the problem." That's when I felt something tighten in my chest. I tried to explain carefully that it wasn't about entitlement, that I wasn't expecting anything, that it just hurt, that it made me feel like our lives weren't part of the consideration at all. Rachel sighed, not loudly, just enough for me to hear it. "I think you're taking it personally," she said. "Mom's always been like this. She probably thinks she's doing the right thing." There it was, the familiar dismissal dressed up as logic. I asked her if it bothered her at all, even a little. She shrugged, even though I couldn't see it. I could hear it in her voice. "I don't know, I've never planned my life around what Mom might leave behind." "Neither have I wanted to say, but I didn't. Instead, I went quiet. Rachel moved on quickly, talking about something else. Work, a trip she was thinking about taking, ordinary things. The conversation shifted as if nothing significant had been said, and I realized, sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, that this wasn't just about my mom. It was about how alone I felt inside this reaction. We came from the same place, but we didn't carry it the same way. What felt like a loss to me barely registered for Rachel. What felt heavy to me felt theoretical to her. I hung up the phone feeling smaller than I had before. Not angry at my sister, not resentful, just isolated. Because that was the moment it really hit me. I might be the only one grieving something that hasn't even happened yet. After talking to my sister, I started doing something I hadn't allowed myself to do before. I started imagining, not in a greedy way, not in a fantasy of luxury or excess, just in a practical, grounded way, the kind of imagining adults do when they're trying to solve problems instead of escape them. I thought about what that house would actually mean. Stability. Not having to worry every time rent goes up, not calculating whether I could survive a job loss or a medical bill. I thought about therapy, the kind you don't ration, the kind where you don't feel pressure to rush progress because each session costs too much, the kind where you can unpack things slowly, honestly, without watching the clock. I thought about a home, a place that's mine, a place I can paint without asking permission, a place that doesn't feel temporary. And then I thought about having a child, not the idea of a child, the reality of one. Daycare costs, time off work, medical care, the need for space, for stability, for something that doesn't feel like it could disappear with one unexpected email or one bad month. That house wouldn't make me rich, it wouldn't erase all my problems, but it would change the shape of my life. And as soon as I let myself think that, I felt the counter-argument rise up immediately. Charity helps people who are barely surviving, people who are struggling in ways I'm not, people who don't have the privileges I do. I reminded myself that I am surviving. I have a job. I'm not in immediate danger. I have choices, even if they're limited. I'm not desperate. So who was I to weigh my comfort against someone else's need? That's when it got complicated, because surviving isn't the same as living. I started asking myself questions I didn't have clean answers to. Is it enough for a parent to raise their children and then step back completely once they're adults? Does responsibility end when the legal definition of adulthood begins? Or does it shift into something quieter, something less obvious but still meaningful? I went back and forth constantly. One moment I felt ashamed for even thinking this way. The next, I felt frustrated that I had to justify wanting stability at all. I wasn't asking my mom to choose between good and evil. I was wondering why choosing her children didn't feel like an option. And sitting with that thought made me deeply uncomfortable, because I couldn't tell where the line was. I couldn't tell if I was being selfish, or if I was just finally being honest with myself. As I kept sitting with it, I started to see the decision differently. Not as a single moment, not as an isolated choice, but as part of a pattern I'd known my whole life. My mom has always chosen what she believes is the morally correct option, the option that looks right from the outside, the option that can't easily be questioned. When she stayed married to my father, it wasn't because she was happy, it was because she believed staying was the right thing to do, because leaving would have been disruptive, because keeping the family intact mattered more than her own comfort. She told herself she was doing it for us, but growing up in that house, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like constant adjustment, like learning to move around someone else's moods, like learning to be careful with emotions because there wasn't room for them. She sacrificed her happiness, yes, but she also sacrificed something else. She sacrificed the feeling of safety we might have had if the truth had been faced earlier. She sacrificed emotional openness in favor of endurance. She chose stability over honesty, again and again. And I don't say that with anger. I understand why she did it. I really do. She believes in doing what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. But the cost of those choices didn't disappear. It just shifted. It landed on quieter shoulders, on ours. Looking at it now, the decision about the house feels like the same kind of choice. A noble one, a selfless one, the kind that looks admirable from the outside and doesn't invite much criticism. Giving to charity is good. Helping others is good. Leaving something behind that benefits the world is good. But once again, it feels like the goodness is being achieved by stepping around her children instead of through them. Once again, the choice is clean and principled and emotionally distant. She isn't cruel. She isn't dramatic. She doesn't abandon people loudly. She does it quietly, while convincing herself she's doing good. And realizing that didn't make me angry, it made me tired, because it meant this moment wasn't new, it was familiar. It was another chapter in a long story where the right thing is chosen and the emotional cost is absorbed silently by the same people every time. And standing there with that awareness, I understood something I hadn't let myself see before. This wasn't just about a house. It was about how often goodness had come at the expense of being seen. There's something else I haven't mentioned yet. I never told my mom that I'm struggling. Not directly, not clearly, not in a way that couldn't be brushed aside. She knows I work, she knows I live on my own, she knows I manage. What she doesn't know is how thin the margin is, how much planning it takes just to stay steady, how often I lie awake doing mental math about the future. I never told her that owning a home feels impossible. I never told her that the idea of having a child feels like something I have to keep pushing further and further away. I never told her how often I feel like I'm treading water while time keeps moving forward without me. And I've never told her that I feel unseen. That one is the hardest to admit. I don't say these things because I don't want to be a burden. I learned early that adding emotional weight to her life didn't make things better. It made her quieter, more withdrawn, so I learned to carry my own. I'm also afraid of how easily my feelings could be dismissed, not maliciously, just gently, with logic, with reassurance that things will work out, that everyone struggles, that this is just how life is. I'm afraid that if I open up, I'll hear something that confirms what I already suspect, that my struggles are real but not important enough to change anything. There's also a deeper fear I don't like to look at too closely, that speaking up would confirm my place in the hierarchy, that it would make it clear that my needs come after what's practical, after what's principled, after what looks good on paper. So I stay quiet. But silence has a cost too, because every time I don't speak, I become part of the decision by default. I accept what's been chosen without adding my reality into the mix. I make it easier for things to stay exactly as they are. And yet, the idea of speaking now feels complicated in a different way. If I tell her how much that house would change my life, am I being honest? Or am I pressuring her without meaning to? If I talk about wanting a child, about wanting stability, about feeling overlooked, am I sharing my truth, or am I manipulating her emotions at the last minute? I don't know where that line is, and that's what keeps me stuck, because I keep circling the same question, over and over again. If I tell her now, am I being honest, or am I pressuring her? Right now, nothing has changed. I still haven't confronted my mom. The will still isn't written, and as far as I know, the decision still stands exactly where she left it. Life has continued in that quiet, ordinary way it always does. We still talk, we still exchange updates, she still asks how work is going, I still tell her it's fine. There was no dramatic fallout, no big conversation, no resolution that tied everything together neatly, just this awareness sitting between us, unspoken. I've had time to think about it from every angle. I've tried to be honest with myself in ways that don't let me off the hook too easily. I understand autonomy. I truly do. I believe people have the right to decide what happens to what they've built. I don't want to control her choices, and I don't want to reduce her life to what she might leave behind. I also understand resentment, how quietly it grows when expectations and reality don't line up, how easy it is to pretend it isn't there, and how damaging it can be if you never acknowledge it at all. And I understand something else too. Love doesn't disappear just because disappointment enters the room. I still love my mom. I still respect her. I still see the sacrifices she made. At the same time, I'm allowed to feel hurt. I'm allowed to notice the absence of consideration without turning her into a villain or myself into a victim. Both things can exist at once. What makes this hard is that there's no clear action to take, no obvious right moment to speak, no guarantee that saying something would lead to understanding instead of distance. So I sit in the gray. I live my life. I plan as best I can with what I have. I try not to build my future around a maybe, even when that maybe could change everything. And when I think about the house now, I try to be honest about what I'm really grieving. It isn't ownership. It isn't money. It isn't inheritance. It's the feeling that my life didn't factor into the equation at all. I don't want her house. I want to know I mattered enough to be considered. So this is where I'm left, not with an answer, but with questions I can't stop circling. Was my mom wrong for choosing Charity over her children? Or is this simply her right, exercised in a way that feels painful but fair? Am I wrong for feeling hurt, even though I'm technically okay? Even though I'm surviving? Even though there are people who need help more than I do? Is inheritance meant to be a gift, or is it a responsibility that carries weight beyond good intentions? If you were my mother, and you had one thing that could change your child's life, would you give it away without asking them how they were doing? And if you were me, would you speak up now, knowing it might change how you're seen forever? Or would you stay silent, protecting the relationship even if it means carrying this alone? I keep turning these questions over, hoping one of them will settle into something solid. But maybe that's the truth of it. Some choices don't have clean answers. Some stories don't end with clarity. So I'll leave you with the question I can't stop asking myself. At what point does generosity to the world become abandonment at home? If you've made it this far, I'd really like to hear what you think. Not just a quick reaction, but your honest take. Do you think my mom made the right choice? Or do you think she owed her children more consideration than she gave? If you were in this situation, what would you do? Would you say something? Or would you let it go and protect the peace? I read the comments, all of them, and this is one of those stories where I think different perspectives actually matter. If this resonated with you, or if you've lived through something similar, let me know below. And if you want more real, complicated stories like this, stories that don't give you easy answers, like this video and subscribe. It really helps, and it encourages us to keep sharing experiences like this one. I'm curious what you would do, because I still don't know what the right answer is.